This is Daryl and Carol. They're a 4-year-old pair of eastern garter snakes that I've been caring for since they were babies. And I've enjoyed them so much. They aren't quite like any other snakes in the reptile room. Unlike most snakes who can't be housed together, garter snakes thrive on the bonds and relationships they form with other snakes. Whatever Daryl and Carol are doing, whether it's basking, sleeping, or even getting a drink of water, Daryl and Carol are almost always side by side. It's one thing to learn how to read an individual snake's body language, but now you have all this body language that has to do with their social interaction. I want to understand that because the more animals start interacting with each other, the easier it is to anthropomorphize them and misunderstand what's really going on between them. It sounds anthropomorphic to say that they love each other, but it's true that there's an incredible connection between them. And I've watched that develop with this pair every day since they were babies. It's really interesting to me that there's always a lot of physical contact going on, but most of the time it's Daryl climbing on her. He instigates most of the cuddling up and rubbing around, but it's also really clear to see that she's thriving on it as much as he is. And as much as it's been one of the best experiences to watch them develop that relationship with each other, it has come with challenges. Garter snakes do make great pets, but I don't think I'd recommend them as someone's first snake. Lots of people might disagree with that, but between fighting over the food as garter snakes do and the challenges that come with keeping them in the same enclosure together, they can be a bit much. They thrive better with tank mates, so it's best to get 2 or 3. But if you get them when they're still too young to sex, as I did, you might end up with a male and female pair. So unless you know you're getting 2 confirmed males or 2 confirmed females, it's something to be aware of and be prepared for. Daryl and Carol have already had 2 litters of babies. And I've enjoyed the experience of watching Carol give birth and caring for the babies, but it's not something I want to keep doing over and over again. I'm not a breeder, and I don't want to be a breeder, and the problem is they won't stop. And before I move forward, I'd like to say that I really try to make all of my videos appropriate for anyone to watch, including children. And actually, I know some parents who watch my videos with their children, and I think that's great. But it's been hard to think about how to discuss some of the topics in this video because it has a lot to do with the birds and the bees. Normally, if you were just here with me in the reptile room, I'd just call it what it is. But I need to be appropriate. So I'm giving you a heads up that you might want to watch first and decide if you want to cover your children's ears. But I'll try to be as delicate about it as I can. I come into the reptile room to check on everyone a lot during the day, and there have been just too many times when I've come in to find these 2 all wrapped up together. For example, here's a clip from a day not too long ago when I was feeding them, and I wish I had gotten more of this on camera, but it was something I've never seen before and probably won't see again. You can see that Carol has swallowed her mouse and has a big lump in her belly. Well, I offered the food to Daryl, and he didn't want it. So I gave Carol her food. And then, just as Carol took the mouse, Daryl came out of nowhere and rode up on her back. And before I knew it, they were going at it, and Carol was eating her mouse at the same time. It was really one of the weirdest things I've ever had happen in the reptile room. Now, as if that wasn't enough, a few days later, Carol's eyes went blue, and I knew she'd shed any time. And the next morning, I came in to find Carol starting her shed. And although she had a perfect shed, Daryl harassed her the entire time. Now, here's one thing to keep in mind. I say he's harassing her, but whether it's the actual mating or the romantic piggyback rides, Carol's 100% complacent in any of this behavior too. The thing is, she's twice his size and twice as strong as he is. Believe me, if she didn't want him touching her, she'd have no problem just flinging him right off of her. And it's not so much the mating behavior that bothers me, although it's been a bit much lately. I want to give Carol's body a break. So considering that they just won't stop, I need to do something. I've held back some male and female babies so I can eventually put males together in one enclosure and females in another, but right now the babies are still way too small to go in with the parents. They're not even eating pinkies yet. I didn't want to have to separate Daryl and Carol, but at this point I think it's the only thing I can do. At this point, I think the need for Carol to have a break is outweighing the benefit they get from their social bond. At least I hope so, because I'm really torn about doing this. But I'm going to set up a new enclosure just for Carol and do some excellent renovations on Daryl's enclosure at the same time. Over the years, I've ended up with a lot of surplus reptile stuff in my garage. There are tanks and terrariums and tubs of substrate and rocks and pieces of wood and all kinds of leftover stuff. So aside from this 40-gallon breeder tank, a screen lid, and 2 new heat lamps, I'm trying to just use things I have laying around. I found some broken pots, and it all came together. Some area behind a garden, or maybe a hidden spot behind an old potting shed. That would be just the kind of place a garter snake would love to live in the wild. So I'm making them 2 broken down potting shed themed enclosures. The first thing I need to do is make sure Carol feels secure and safe in this new enclosure, so I put some black window film on the back and sides of this 40-gallon tank. I put down a rock that I saved just for this enclosure to sit under the heat lamp and create a basking spot. I put a thick layer of substrate down and mixed in some Zoomed Repta chips. And to stick with the potting shed theme, I found this big round piece from a large terracotta flower pot that broke, and I think Carol's going to find it interesting to climb on and explore. And I put a couple pieces of wood in as a warm side and a cool side hide. And after fiddling around with some final touches, I love it. Now it's time to bring it to life with some bioactivity. And like I always do for my snakes, I use bioactive substrate but forego any plants. I've been too busy to go out and forage in the woods, but I was able to gather a little bit of moss and a good number of isopods from my garden, which seems appropriate here. The moss will be nice in these enclosures, but it's not just for looks. I specifically gathered this moss and some leaf mold as a means of introducing springtails into the enclosure. I've actually had more success with these wild local springtails than I've had with the springtails I've bought and cultured. Seriously, I've stopped buying and culturing any springtails or isopods, and my bioactive enclosures are thriving better than they ever have, even ones where I've never added isopods or springtails on purpose at all. They just come in on the moss and the wood. Even while I was building this new enclosure for Carol, I watched this absolutely beautiful moth squeeze out of the crack in this wood. So why would I want to sterilize it all? I want all of those springtails and all of the different sorts of bioactive microorganisms that live in and on this wood and moss and leaf mold. I'm also going to change the way I heat both of these snakes. First of all, I'm going to ditch the heat mats. Then for heat and UVB, I'm using an 80-watt ZoomEd PowerSun mercury vapor bulb that provides heat and UVA and UVB in one bulb. With the lamp heating the rock as the sun would in the wild, I think it seems like a more natural way to provide their heat and basking spot. I've let this run long enough to know it's creating the exact basking spot temperature and temperature gradient I want. There are spots that go up to 87 degrees and the mid-80s around that, and then moving over to the 70s on the cool side. I left space along the sides of this rock because I know Carol and she'll curl up right in those spaces to bask. Actually, I'll jump for a second to a shot of Carol a couple days after being in this enclosure, and she's curling up around this rock just as I had imagined. She's gone right back to her regular routine of basking and sleeping and moving somewhere to thermoregulate, but she obviously loves the basking spot this lamp makes, and she looks beautiful under the UVA light. And changing to overhead heat means I can use a deeper layer of substrate in Daryl's enclosure. And for him, I used a smaller broken pot to stick with the theme and also refreshed his springtails and isopods. I decided to keep Daryl in the old enclosure with more familiar things and scents because I think this separation might be traumatic for them, but if so, it might be more for him. But I did completely move things around and changed things up. I also set up Daryl's heat and UVB just the same way I did for Carol. Carol looks as beautiful as ever right now with her fresh new skin, and I can't wait to see her in this enclosure. She took a couple shots at my hand, but it's just because she thinks I'm going to feed her. Once she realized there wasn't food, she was just fine. I'm going to miss seeing Daryl and Carol together, but I think it's really for the best. For the snakes and for me. Carol can get the break that I think her body needs, and I can have a much needed break from constantly caring for the next litter of babies. I'll be keeping a close eye on them, and if they seem unhappy being alone, I could always put them back together, or who knows, I might decide to just get another adult male and adult female. One thing I really appreciate about Daryl and Carol is that although a lot of it has been trial by fire, I've learned so much from them. And I'm sure that's helped me care better for my other snakes too. And just like anything in life, there's always more to learn. So I'm sure you'll see more of Daryl and Carol in the future. So stay tuned to the channel, and I'll see you next time.